Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Barbara, and congratulations to the organisers on an excellent conference. It's been very heartening to be surrounded by so many campaigners, other campaigners, who are working to reduce harm. Now, indeed, this is what I've been asked to talk about. How do I see harm reduction in 2025? Well, it's a long way off. But what I want to do is, as well as congratulating you all for the work you do, trying to reduce the harm for individual users, to decriminalise individual drug use, I would like to pull back from the personal to the more macro political picture, which has been touched on by Madam Dreyfus and also by Joanne just now slightly. What I would like to do is think about harm reduction on a global scale, because it's all very well saying we have needle exchanges or someone doesn't go to prison for smoking a bit of weed, but we need to be aware of the regional level, the countrywide level, the global level of the harm that is caused by the war on drugs, and particularly in the producer countries ravaged by violence and the transit countries which have just descended over the last few years, particularly across West Africa, into narco states. That is harm on a regional scale, and that is what we need to think about reducing over the next decade or so. And I think the only way that we can realistically do that is to end prohibition. So allow me to explain the position of the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're quite a new organisation. We were only established in 2002, and yet now we are global. We have a presence in 120 countries, and we have over 100,000 law enforcement supporters. And we're not just police officers. We come from a range of law enforcers. So the whole process, from the police through to the judges and the lawyers and the prison governors and the undercover cops, and of course the occasional intelligence officer, such as myself. We also have a few drug czars in our group, so we've got quite a respectable spread. Our position is that we don't condone the use of drugs, but if people choose to do it and it's consensual adult behaviour, then who are we to, as states, as nation states, to interfere with consensual adult behaviour that doesn't harm anyone else? We have a situation which has spiralled out of control. Prohibition has been an abject failure over the last 50 years. We haven't got a drug-free world. We have a world where drugs are more available, more potent, and cheaper, and usage is much greater than it was 50 years ago. So to quote another Nobel Prize winner, Albert Einstein, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing again and again and expect a different outcome. And that is precisely what we are doing with this failed war on drugs. I became interested in LEAP about 5 years ago. I'm very well aware from my background working as a counter-terrorism officer with MI5 in the UK, the linkage between the drugs and terrorism. One of my roles there was to look at terrorist logistics, which is the movement of personnel and weapons into and out of the UK. And this was at the height of the Irish terrorism campaign on the UK mainland. And it became very obvious, working very closely with customs and other law enforcement agencies, that it was like looking for a needle in a haystack, either for people or weapons, and of course, drug consignments coming in. It's impossible for them to stop, even on an island, it's impossible for them to stop drugs getting to our maximum security prisons. It's a ridiculous situation. And I became very aware as well, looking at the Irish question, how much funding these groups, these terrorist organisations, get from the illegal drugs trade. And this is true globally. Afghanistan has been mentioned. Since the West tried to liberate the grateful Afghanis back in 2003 by invading their country, humanitarian intervention in their country, the acreage undergrowth of the opium poppy has in most regions doubled. And in some regions, particularly those controlled by the British Army, by the way, it has trebled. So they are seeing bumper crops. The trade there is worth a whopping $500 million per year, and that's a conservative estimate. And most of that money is under the control of the Taliban and the Afghan warlords and the very groups that we are supposed to be fighting the war on terror against. Similarly, in Colombia, if you look there, where there's been the FARC insurgency for the last 40 years, the cocaine trade there is worth at least $300 million per year. And again, most of that money is under the control of a group deemed to be a terrorist organization. And we see this as well in evolving narco states across West Africa, places like Guinea-Bissau, Mali, and now Libya, again, since it was gratefully liberated by the wonderful Western humanitarian intervention forces 3 years ago, we have a situation in Libya where it is now a transit country and where drug use in Libya itself has skyrocketed with the accompanying health issues as well. All this money is going into the hands of terrorist organizations, largely, as well as the illegal crime cartels. It is estimated by the DEA in the US that over half the designated terrorist groups around the world get most of their funding from the illegal drug trade. Now, that is ridiculous. Is anyone else seeing the illogicality of this here, where we impose prohibition on the world, creating an illegal drug trade, which is worth between $320 and $500 billion per year, most of which goes into organized crime cartels and terrorist groups. So we are funding the very organizations that we then wage the war on terror to try and oppose. It is completely illogical. Well, from our perspective, it might be completely illogical. From the perspective of, say, the military security industrial complex, it might be seen to be the perfect business model. And it's certainly good for bank business as well. There have been scandal after scandal after scandal of banks being caught out illegally laundering drug money. Wachovia, 10 years ago, which when the scandal broke was immediately absorbed into Wells Fargo. So all those responsible for laundering all this money were just quietly shunted out of the way. Nobody was prosecuted, nobody was held to account, and no justice was done. And then HSBC, which was mentioned earlier, I think, which laundered consciously almost $1 trillion of drugs money, was caught and had a fine, sure, but it was really a rap on the wrist. It was not a proper punishment. It was only $1.9 billion. That is not a deterrent to other banks going out there and other banks laundering money. When many activists around the world start calling them financial terrorists or banksters, you have to think they're onto something when you're looking at this business model. In fact, I think it was Antonio Maria Costa back in 2009, who then headed up Unidoc, famously said that in the 2008 financial crash, if it weren't for drug money and drug laundering and money laundering, most of these stricken banks would have had no liquidity at all. That is how dependent some of our banks have become on this illegal drug trade. So it's a mess. It's a very big business mess, but it is definitely a mess. And this is the scale of global harm going on. The erosion of our democracies, the erosion of whole nation states, the erosion and subversion of governments. So it's illogical to carry on doing the same thing, expecting different outcomes. And that is why LEAP advocates the end of prohibition, because, of course, once you take away prohibition and make the trade legally regulated and taxed, you take away the profit motive for the illegal drugs trade. And once you take away that profit motive, the criminals and the terrorists will lose a lot of their funding. But it's not all bad, of course. I mean, it's been wonderful being here and hearing all the stories about the great strides forward across Europe in many different countries. The Portuguese success with decriminalization. Of course, the wonderful work in Switzerland since 1994 with the heroin treatment centers, and the fact that that's been now rolled out across Europe in many countries, I think 6 or 7 at the last count. And also sensible ideas like coffee shops in the Netherlands or cannabis social clubs across Belgium, I think in France now, as well as Spain and the UK. So there are steps going ahead which help the users, which help those who choose to ingest currently illegal drugs, and that is fantastic. But we are never going, that is only managing the consumer side. We need to deal as well with the producer side, the illegal drugs trade that is ravaging our world, which has created the biggest global crime wave we have ever seen. It is a crazy, crazy situation. So this is why we advocate the ending of prohibition. And one of the things we've tried to do, because of course we have this wonderful pool of expertise and resource within LEAP, particularly of lawyers and judges, so we produced a new document, which is the proposed amendment for United Nations drugs treaties. And this is ahead of the UNGAS meeting in 2016. And this is where some of our lawyers sat down and went through all the UN documents and said, well, this is where we need to amend. This is what we can do with this. This is what we can do with that. And the obvious model, of course, is to say, well, we regulate tobacco, we regulate alcohol, we tax them. Why not do the same things? But so this is a very useful little document, very open to any further suggestions. You can download it from our website, which is just leap.cc, and that will give you a sort of framework, a possible path forward in ending prohibition. So I just want to thank everyone once again for a lovely conference, and anyone who's interested in LEAP, please have a look at our website. And I'm also in the process as European Director in setting up LEAP branches across Europe in different countries. So this summer we will be launching in the UK. We hope to launch in Denmark shortly, and we are certainly launching in Germany just at the end of the summer. So I hope very much to have the opportunity to work with many of your groups across Europe. And I would suggest that you could perhaps see us as a resource that you too can use. Because if you have a meeting, you have a conference, and you want someone from law enforcement to come and say prohibition has failed, it is a unique voice to add to this drug debate. So we're very happy to help and make a contribution to the ongoing fight to end the madness that has been the failed war on drugs over the last 50 years. Thank you very much.